The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon as Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen stood at the window of the military base in Thule, Greenland. Her breath created small patches of fog on the cold glass as she watched the snow swirl outside. At 32 years old, Sarah had spent the last 8 years of her life training for Arctic missions, but something about this assignment felt different. The room behind her buzzed with activity as her team of 4 Marines prepared their gear. Each member had been carefully chosen for their unique skills in Arctic warfare and survival. Sarah turned away from the window and looked at her team with pride. There was Corporal James Martinez, a former Marine biologist whose knowledge of Arctic wildlife had proven invaluable countless times. Private First Class Emily Watson, their technical expert, was busy checking their seismic monitoring equipment. Sergeant Mike O'Connor, their medical specialist, organized his enhanced cold weather medical kit, while Lance Corporal David Kim, their communications expert, tested their satellite phones and radio equipment. "Team, gather round," Sarah called out, her voice calm but authoritative. The 4 Marines quickly formed a semicircle around the large metal table where a detailed map of northern Greenland lay spread out. Red markers indicated the location of the abandoned research station they would be investigating. "Command received unusual seismic readings from this area," Sarah explained, pointing to a spot about 50 miles north of their current position. Normally, they'd send in a scientific team, but with the recent diplomatic tensions and increased military activity in the Arctic region, we're going in first to secure the area. Martinez raised his hand, his dark eyebrows furrowed with concern. "Sergeant, I've been reviewing the wildlife reports from the past month. There's been a significant increase in polar bear activity in that sector. The unusually warm spring has disrupted their normal hunting patterns." Sarah nodded, having already considered this factor. "That's partly why you're here, Martinez. We need your expertise to help us avoid any unnecessary encounters with the local wildlife." Private Watson stepped forward, holding up her tablet. "The seismic equipment is ready, Sergeant. I've modified it to work in temperatures as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit. The readings show increasing activity over the past week, but nothing that suggests immediate danger." The team spent the next hour going through their equipment checklist. Every piece of gear had to be thoroughly tested. In the Arctic, equipment failure wasn't just an inconvenience, it could be fatal. Their white Arctic camouflage uniforms were reinforced with the latest thermal technology, each layer carefully designed to protect against the extreme cold while allowing necessary movement. As they loaded their gear onto 2 snowmobiles and an Arctic terrain vehicle, Sarah noticed the sky darkening despite it being only mid-morning. Weather in the Arctic was notoriously unpredictable, and they needed to make good time to reach their first checkpoint before the conditions worsened. "Command estimates this will be a 5-day operation," Sarah announced during their final briefing. "We'll establish a base camp near the old research station and conduct our investigation from there. Remember your training. The cold is our first enemy. Watch each other for signs of hypothermia and frost exposure." Lance Corporal Kim approached with the latest weather report. "Sergeant, we have a 3-day window of relatively stable weather. After that, satellite data shows a low-pressure system moving in from the north." Sarah made a mental note to adjust their timeline accordingly. In the Arctic, weather dictated everything. She looked at each member of her team, seeing the mix of excitement and apprehension in their eyes. They were among the best the Marine Corps had to offer in Arctic operations, but nature always had a way of testing even the most prepared soldiers. "Mount up," she ordered, zipping up her thermal jacket. The team moved with practiced efficiency, securing their gear and taking their positions. The engines of their vehicles roared to life, the sound muffled by the thick snow that covered everything in sight. As they moved out from the base, following a carefully planned route across the vast white expanse, Sarah felt that familiar surge of adrenaline that came with each new mission. But there was something else too, a nagging feeling that this routine reconnaissance mission was about to become anything but routine. The Arctic sun cast long shadows across the snow as their small convoy headed north, leaving civilization behind. None of them knew that in the coming days, they would face challenges that would test not just their military training, but their humanity as well. The second day of their Arctic mission began with a spectacular display of colors painting the sky. The team had set up their base camp the previous evening, about 2 miles from the abandoned research station. As they ate their breakfast of heated NREs, Lance Corporal Kim monitored the communication equipment while Private Watson checked the latest seismic readings. Sergeant Chen, Watson called out, her voice carrying a note of concern. The ground vibrations are getting stronger. Whatever's causing this isn't natural seismic activity. Sarah walked over to examine the readings, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. The data showed regular patterns of movement, unlike the random nature of normal ground shifts. Before she could respond, Martinez burst out of his tent, his face flushed with excitement. "Bear tracks," he exclaimed, pointing toward a series of large impressions in the snow about 50 yards from their camp. Fresh ones, probably made within the last hour. The team quickly gathered their gear and followed Martinez as he examined the tracks. His years of studying marine mammals made him their best expert in Arctic wildlife. He knelt beside one of the prints, placing his gloved hand next to it for scale. "It's a female," he said, studying the shape and size of the track. "And judging by the depth and pattern of these prints, she's carrying extra weight. I'd say she's pregnant." Sarah felt her chest tighten. A pregnant polar bear could be far more dangerous than a regular one. They needed to be extremely careful. "Which direction is she heading?" she asked. Martinez pointed toward a series of ice formations about a quarter-mile away. The jagged ice structures rose like crystal towers against the pale sky, creating a maze of frozen corridors and caves. The tracks led directly toward them. "We need to check it out," Sarah decided. "The research station is in that direction anyway. Watson, bring the seismic equipment. The rest of you, stay alert and keep your tranquilizer guns ready. Regular ammunition is absolute last resort." They moved forward slowly, following the tracks while maintaining a careful distance. O'Connor kept his medical kit ready, while Kim maintained constant contact with their base command. The ice formations grew larger as they approached, creating deep shadows that made visibility challenging. The tracks led them to the entrance of a large ice cave. The opening was about 8 feet high and surprisingly regular in shape. Watson's seismic equipment began beeping more rapidly. "The readings are strongest here," she whispered, showing Sarah the display. Martinez studied the entrance with his binoculars. "This isn't just a random cave," he said quietly. "The bear has made her den here. These marks along the walls show regular use." Just then, they heard a low rumble from above. Everyone looked up to see small pieces of ice falling from the massive shelf that hung over the cave entrance. The seismic equipment's beeping increased in intensity. "The ice shelf is unstable," Watson reported, her voice tense. "The readings suggest it's slowly breaking apart." As if to confirm her assessment, a larger chunk of ice broke free and crashed nearby, the sound echoing across the Arctic landscape. From inside the cave came a different sound, a deep, warning growl. Martinez raised his hand for silence, then pointed his thermal imaging camera toward the cave entrance. The screen showed a large, bright shape about 30 feet inside. "There she is," he whispered. "And I was right. She's definitely pregnant. Very pregnant." Sarah realized they had a serious situation on their hands. The bear had chosen the worst possible place for her den. The unstable ice shelf above could collapse at any time, and based on Watson's readings, that possibility was becoming more likely by the hour. Through his thermal camera, Martinez continued to observe the bear. "Look at how she's moving," he said, passing the camera to Sarah. "She's not just pregnant. She's showing signs of early labor. She's pacing and nesting." The team exchanged worried looks. Their simple reconnaissance mission had just become far more complicated. They had found the source of the seismic activity, the gradually failing ice shelf, but now they faced an even bigger challenge: a pregnant polar bear about to give birth in a death trap. Sarah looked at her team, seeing the same concern reflected in their eyes. The bear's natural instincts had led her to a den that could become her tomb. They had a decision to make, and they needed to make it fast. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen paced back and forth at their temporary observation post, set up a safe distance from the ice cave. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow as she considered their options. Her team watched her, waiting for a decision that could mean life or death for the pregnant polar bear. "Give me the worst-case scenario," Sarah said to Watson, who hadn't left her seismic monitoring equipment since they discovered the den. Watson adjusted her snow goggles and pointed to the latest readings. "Based on the current data, this ice shelf could collapse within 72 hours. Maybe sooner if we get any significant temperature changes or strong winds." She paused, then added, "And the weather report isn't looking good." Martinez, who had been observing the bear through his thermal camera, joined them with his notebook full of quick sketches and observations. "The bear is definitely in early labor," he reported. "In normal conditions, I'd say we should just leave her alone. But—" he looked up at the dangerous ice shelf hanging above the den. Sarah nodded, understanding his concern. She turned to O'Connor, their medical specialist. "What about sedation? Is it safe for a bear in labor?" O'Connor shook his head, snow falling from his hood with the movement. "It's extremely risky, Sergeant. Sedation could slow down her labor or affect the cubs. Not to mention, if she's already stressed, adding tranquilizers could be fatal." Lance Corporal Kim raised his hand, holding their satellite phone. "Sergeant, I've made contact with the nearest wildlife rescue center. They're a 6-hour flight away, and with the approaching storm system, they're grounded for at least the next 12 hours. Sarah felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. Their original mission parameters said nothing about wildlife rescue. They were supposed to investigate the seismic activity, report their findings, and head back to base. Simple and straightforward. But now, standing in the vast Arctic wilderness, those parameters felt inadequate. The bear's den was directly related to their mission. The seismic activity they detected was the slowly failing ice shelf above it. Could they really just report it and walk away? "Martinez," Sarah called. "How long does polar bear labor usually last?" "Typically 12 to 24 hours, he replied, "but she's showing signs that suggest she's been in early labor for several hours already. The cubs could come any time in the next day or so." A loud crack echoed across the ice field, making everyone jump. A section of ice, about the size of a car door, broke free from the shelf and crashed near the cave entrance. The bear's low growl rumbled from inside the den. "That tears it," Sarah said, her decision crystallizing. "We can't just leave her here to die." She gathered her team in a tight circle, their breath creating small clouds in the cold air. "But this has to be a unanimous decision. This isn't just dangerous for the bear, it's dangerous for us. If anyone feels we should stick to our original mission and report this to Wildlife Services, speak now." The team looked at each other. No one spoke. Their silence was their answer. "All right then," Sarah continued, pulling out their map. "We have 3 major problems to solve. First, we need a new den location, somewhere safe and suitable for a mother bear with newborn cubs. Second, we need a way to move her that won't endanger her, or cubs, or us. Third, we need to do all this before that ice shelf comes down or the storm hits, whichever comes first." Watson raised her hand. "There's another problem, Sergeant. The vibrations from the ice shelf are getting stronger. All this activity might be speeding up the collapse." Sarah looked at her team's faces, seeing determination mixed with concern. They were Marines, trained to handle extreme situations. But this was different from anything they'd prepared for. One wrong move could cost them their lives, or the lives of the bear and her unborn cubs. "We have until sunset to come up with a solid plan," Sarah announced, checking her watch. "After that, we'll lose too much daylight to work safely. Let's split up the tasks. Watson, keep monitoring that ice shelf. Martinez, find us an alternate den location. O'Connor, work up a medical contingency plan. Kim, get on the horn with every wildlife expert you can reach. I want options, people, real ones." As her team dispersed to their tasks, Sarah looked back at the ice cave. Another small chunk of ice fell, and the bear's growl echoed across the snow. Time was running out. As the Arctic sun began its slow descent in the sky, Martinez returned to the camp, his face red from the cold, but his eyes bright with excitement. He found Sarah and the team huddled around their portable heater, reviewing the data from their various assignments. "I found it," Martinez announced, spreading his map on their folding table. "About half a mile east of here, there's a natural ice formation that's perfect for a new den. It's on solid ground, protected from the wind, and most importantly, there's no unstable ice above it." Sarah studied the location while Watson pulled up the seismic readings for that area. "The ground is stable there," Watson confirmed, pointing to her screen. "No unusual vibrations or signs of instability." O'Connor stepped forward, holding his medical tablet. "I've been consulting with a wildlife veterinarian over satellite phone. We have 2 options for moving her." He held up two different tranquilizer darts. A full sedation, which is risky for her and the cubs, or a mild calming agent that will keep her awake but less aggressive. The mild option, Sarah decided immediately. We can't risk full sedation with her being in labor. What else do we have? Kim raised his hand, his satellite phone still pressed to his ear. Good news and bad news, Sergeant. The good news is that I've got a wildlife rescue team standing by with a specialized transport cage. They can airdrop it to us within 2 hours. He paused, looking at the darkening sky. The bad news is that storm system is moving faster than expected. We got maybe 8 hours before it hits, not 12. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. 8 hours wasn't much time for such a complicated operation. She turned to Watson, who was still monitoring the ice shelf. How's our ceiling looking? Not good, Watson replied, showing her the latest readings. The vibrations are getting stronger. I'd say we have 6 hours, maybe less, before that shelf comes down. Sarah took a deep breath and gathered her team closer. All right, here's how we're going to do this. It's going to be like a military operation, but with one very large, very pregnant VIP who could kill us if we make a wrong move. She pulled out a marker and began drawing on their portable whiteboard, creating a step-by-step diagram of their plan. Phase 1, Kim, as soon as that transport cage arrives, you and Watson will prepare the new den site. Make it as attractive as possible. Martinez will advise on what a female bear looks for in a den. Phase 2, she continued, drawing arrows on the board. Martinez and I will begin the food trail. We'll use the fish and seal meat from our emergency supplies to create a path from her current den to the new location. O'Connor, you'll prepare the mild sedative and be ready with backup darts if needed. Phase 3, once everything is in place, we'll need to encourage her to leave the den. Martinez, what's the best way to do that without getting ourselves killed? Martinez stepped forward, pointing to his wildlife behavior notes. Bears have an incredibly sensitive sense of smell. If we can get some of the fish close enough to her den without threatening her, her natural instincts might lead her out. The key is to stay downwind and give her plenty of space. But what if she doesn't cooperate? Watson asked, voicing everyone's main concern. What if she decides to stay put or becomes aggressive? Sarah pointed to their backup plan on the board. That's where the transport cage comes in. If we can't lure her out safely, we'll have to position the cage near the den entrance and try to guide her into it. It's riskier. We'll have the mild sedative as backup. O'Connor raised his hand. There's another concern, Sergeant. If she gives birth before we can move her, the whole situation changes. Newborn cubs can't be exposed to these temperatures for long. Sarah nodded grimly. That's why this has to work on the first try. We don't have time for mistakes. She checked her watch. The transport cage will be here in 90 minutes. Use that time to prepare your gear. Double-check everything. If that shelf comes down or the storm hits while we're in the middle of this. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the stakes. As if to emphasize the point, another crack echoed from the ice shelf, followed by the bear's deep growl from within her den. One more thing, Sarah added, looking each team member in the eye. We're Marines. We adapt and overcome. But if at any point someone sees something going wrong, you speak up immediately. We're not losing anyone today, not the bear, not her cubs, and not any of us. The transport cage landed by parachute exactly where Kim had marked the drop zone. As Sarah watched O'Connor and Watson drag the heavy metal structure across the snow, a series of loud cracks echoed from the ice shelf. The sounds were getting more frequent now, like a countdown they couldn't stop. Sergeant. Martinez called urgently from his observation position. You need to see this. Sarah rushed to his side, taking the thermal camera he handed her. Through the screen, she could see the bear's heat signature, but something was different. The bear's movements had changed from restless pacing to something more purposeful. She's not just in early labor anymore, Martinez explained, his voice tense. She's actively giving birth. Look at her position. Sarah felt her heart sink. Their carefully planned rescue had just become far more complicated. She grabbed her radio. All teams, fall back to my position. Plans have changed. Within minutes, the team gathered around her, their breath visible in the cold air. Above them, dark clouds were rolling in faster than predicted, bringing with them the promise of the approaching storm. The mild sedative won't work now, O'Connor said, shaking his head as he looked at the thermal images. We can't risk moving her during active labor. It could kill her or the cubs. Watson's seismic monitor began beeping more rapidly. Sergeant, the ice shelf's vibrations are intensifying. We're running out of time. Sarah looked at each member of her team, then at the ice cave where their mission had become so complicated. They needed a new plan, and they needed it fast. Kim, get on the satellite phone. I need to speak with command. But when Kim tried the phone, he was met with static. He checked their backup radio system with the same result. Communications are down, he reported grimly. The storm's magnetic interference is blocking our signals. Another series of cracks rang out, louder this time. A chunk of ice the size of a small car crashed down just yards from the cave entrance. The bear's growls had changed to sounds of distress, echoing from deep within the den. We can't move her, we can't sedate her, and we can't call for help, Sarah summarized, her mind racing through their options. So we adapt. New plan, we're going to protect that den until she's done giving birth. Protect it? From a collapsing ice shelf? Watson asked, looking up at the massive wall of ice above them. How? Sarah was already moving toward their equipment pile. We've got support poles from our emergency shelter. Martinez, O'Connor, help me set them up as temporary braces. Watson, keep monitoring those seismic readings. I want to know the second anything changes. Kim, start unpacking our emergency lights and heaters. The team moved with renewed purpose, but nature wasn't going to make it easy for them. The wind was picking up, driving snow and ice into their faces as they worked. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the storm approached. Inside the den, the bear's sounds were changing. Martinez, who kept checking the thermal camera between helping with the support poles, reported that she was making progress. First cub is coming, he announced. But she's stressed. The noise and vibrations are scaring her. Sarah and O'Connor had just finished securing the third support pole when Watson's monitor began screaming with alerts. Major structural shift incoming. She yelled over the wind. The ice above them groaned like a living thing. Small cracks appeared in the surface, spreading like spider webs. The team scrambled away from the den entrance just as another large piece of ice crashed down, missing them by feet. We need more support on the left side, Sarah shouted, fighting to be heard over the wind and cracking ice. O'Connor, Martinez, get the last poles. Kim, bring those lights closer. We need to see what we're doing. But as they moved to follow her orders, a new sound cut through the chaos. The unmistakable cry of a newborn polar bear cub, followed by the mother's responding call. The team froze, looking at each other in the growing darkness. They were now responsible for not just one life, but two, and based on the bear's continued sounds of labor, possibly more to come. Sarah looked at her team, their faces illuminated by the emergency lights in the growing storm. Nobody moves from this position, she ordered. We hold this den together if we have to do it with our bare hands. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the snow as the team worked to stabilize the ice cave. The wind howled around them, driving snow and ice sideways through the air. Inside the den, the first cub's cries had grown stronger, a high-pitched sound that cut through the storm's roar. The first cub is healthy, Martinez reported, his eyes glued to the thermal camera screen. It's moving actively, and the mother is responding well, but she's still in labor with at least one more cub to come. Sarah directed her flashlight beam at the support poles they had managed to position around the den's entrance. The metal poles groaned under the weight of the ice above, but they were holding. For now. Temperatures dropping fast, O'Connor warned, checking his weather meter. -40 and still falling. The cubs won't survive long if we can't keep this area somewhat sheltered. Watson worked quickly to set up their emergency heat lamps, positioning them carefully to provide warmth without disturbing the bear. The seismic activity is still intense, she said, but the support poles are redistributing some of the weight. They might buy us another hour or two. Kim had rigged a makeshift windbreak using their emergency shelters and equipment cases. It wasn't much, but it helped create a small pocket of relative calm around the den entrance. He kept trying the satellite phone every few minutes, hoping to break through the storm's interference. Inside the den, the mother bear's sounds changed again. Martinez's excitement was visible even through his frost-covered snow goggles. Second cub is coming, he announced. The mother's vital signs are strong. She's doing great, considering the circumstances. The team huddled closer to their portable heater, taking turns watching the den entrance and monitoring their equipment. Hours passed in a blur of activity, adjusting support poles, replacing heat lamps that flickered in the cold, and reinforcing their windbreak against the strengthening storm. Sarah organized them into shifts, making sure everyone got short breaks to warm up in their emergency shelter. But no one wanted to stay away long. They felt responsible for every cry and movement from within the den. Second cub is out. Martinez's voice carried above the wind sometime near midnight. It's smaller than the first one, but it's moving well. The mother is cleaning them both now. The team shared tired smiles, but their relief was short-lived. A massive crack suddenly split the air, louder than any before. One of the support poles bent alarmingly under a new shift of the ice shelf. "Everyone move," Sarah shouted, pushing her team back as a shower of ice chunks rained down. They scrambled to safety, watching in horror as part of their protective structure collapsed. But somehow, the main support poles held. The den entrance remained intact, though now partially blocked by fallen ice. From inside, they could hear the cubs crying and their mother's deep, warning growls. "She's scared but not panicked," Martinez reported, checking the thermal camera as soon as they could safely approach again. "The cubs are still active and staying close to her. Body temperatures are good." Sarah did a quick team check. Everyone was cold and exhausted, but unhurt. The question now was how long they could maintain their protective position. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the ice shelf was becoming more unstable by the hour. "The cubs need at least 12 hours with their mother before they can be moved safely," Martinez said, answering the question before Sarah could ask it. "Their first hours are crucial for bonding and feeding." Watson's seismic monitor continued to beat steadily, a constant reminder of the danger above them. "The whole shelf could come down any minute," she warned. "These readings are off the charts." Sarah looked at her team's tired faces, then at the den where two new lives had just entered the world against incredible odds. They had come too far to give up now. "We got two healthy cubs and a strong mother bear," she said, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "We're going to see this through. O'Connor, check our medical supplies. Watson, keep monitoring that ice shelf. Martinez, don't take your eyes off those thermal readings. Kim, keep trying to reach base. We need to be ready to move them the moment it becomes safe." Inside the den, the cubs' cries grew quieter as they found their way to their first meal. Despite the howling wind and groaning ice, nature was taking its course. The team settled in for a long night of vigilance, knowing that the real challenge of moving a mother bear and her newborn cubs still lay ahead. #hashtag the rescue. 14 hours after the cubs' birth, the storm finally began to ease. The first rays of Arctic sunlight revealed the full extent of their situation. The ice shelf above them was barely holding together, with massive cracks running through its surface. The team's support poles were bent and groaning under the weight. "The cubs are strong enough to move now," Martinez announced, checking the thermal camera one last time. "They both fed several times and their body temperatures are stable. It's now or never." Sarah nodded, gathering her team for one final briefing. Their faces were exhausted after the long night, but their eyes showed determination. "We got one shot at this," she said. "The transport cage is ready at the new den site." "All set up," Kim confirmed. "I've lined it with the emergency blankets for extra warmth. The path is cleared all the way to the new location." O'Connor held up the last of their seal meat. "This is everything we have left to bait the trail. The mother bear should be hungry after giving birth." Sarah looked at Watson, who was still monitoring the seismic activity. "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour," Watson replied grimly. "The vibrations are getting stronger by the minute. That shelf is coming down, with or without our help." They began implementing their plan immediately. O'Connor and Kim laid out a trail of seal meat, starting from just outside the den entrance and leading toward the transport cage. Martinez prepared the mild sedative as a backup, while Sarah and Watson removed the damaged support poles one by one. The mother bear sensed the change immediately. Her deep growls echoed from the den as the team retreated to their positions. Through the thermal camera, they could see her moving toward the den entrance, cubs staying close behind her. "She's sniffing the air," Martinez whispered. "The seal meat has her attention." The bear's massive head appeared at the den entrance. In the morning light, they could see her clearly for the first time, her white fur matted from the birth, her dark eyes alert and wary. Behind her, two tiny cubs peeked out at the world. "Nobody move," Sarah ordered quietly. "Let her make the decision." The bear tested the air again, then slowly stepped out of the den. The cubs stumbled after her, their small legs still unsteady. She found the first piece of seal meat and devoured it quickly, then followed the scent to the next piece. "It's working," Kim whispered excitedly. "She's following the trail." But just then, a deep rumble came from above. The bear froze, looking up at the ice shelf. Small pieces of ice began raining down around them. "The shelf is going," Watson shouted. "Everyone clear the area." The bear grabbed one of her cubs by the scruff of its neck and bolted, but in the wrong direction, away from their planned escape route. The second cub tumbled after her, crying out. "New plan," Sarah yelled. "O'Connor, Kim, get the cage. We'll bring it to her." The team sprang into action. O'Connor and Kim sprinted for the transport cage while Sarah and Martinez tried to circle around to guide the bear back towards safety. Watson kept her eyes on the ice shelf, calling out warnings as new cracks appeared. The bear had backed herself and her cubs against a wall of ice, growling at the falling debris. The transport cage arrived just as a massive section of the shelf broke free. "Now or never," Sarah shouted. They positioned the cage between the bear and the falling ice, creating a tunnel of safety. The bear looked at the cage, then at the collapsing ice above her. Her survival instincts took over. With one cub still in her mouth and the other following close behind, she charged into the cage. Kim slammed the door shut just as the ice shelf gave way completely. The team grabbed the cage's handles and pulled with all their remaining strength, driving it clear of the avalanche of ice that buried the old den site. They didn't stop until they reached the new den location, a safe distance from the collapse. The sound of crashing ice finally faded, replaced by the soft cries of the cubs and their mother's quieter growls. Martinez checked the bears through the cage's viewing window. "They're all okay," he announced, his voice breaking with emotion. "They're all going to be okay. ### aftermath and legacy." 2 weeks after the dramatic rescue, Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen stood at attention in the Thule Air Base Command Center. Her team lined up beside her, their Arctic uniforms replaced by formal dress blues. The base commander stood before them, holding 5 commendation medals. "What these Marines did goes beyond their normal duty," the commander announced to the gathered crowd. "They not only completed their original mission of investigating the seismic activity, but also saved 3 lives in the process." The story of their rescue had spread quickly. News channels across the world had picked up the satellite footage of the final moments. The collapsing ice shelf, the team's desperate rush with the transport cage, and the bear family's narrow escape. The images had captured the public's imagination and sparked important conversations about climate change and Arctic wildlife conservation. Martinez, who had been temporarily reassigned to work with the wildlife tracking team, stepped forward with his latest report. "The mother and cubs are doing excellent," he announced, showing everyone the drone footage from that morning. "They fully adapted to their new den, and both cubs are growing stronger every day." The wildlife scientists had attached a tracking collar to the mother bear before releasing her from the transport cage. The data showed that she had settled well into the new den, which was now marked as a protected site. The cubs were already showing their personalities, the larger one adventurous, the smaller one more cautious but clever. "The Marine Corps is not typically in the business of wildlife rescue," the commander continued, "but this mission has shown us something important. As the Arctic changes, we need to change with it. That's why, effective immediately, we're establishing a new Arctic Wildlife Response Unit." Sarah and her team exchanged surprised looks. This was news to them. "Staff Sergeant Chen will head the training program," the commander announced, "teaching other Marines how to handle similar situations. Corporal Martinez will serve as our wildlife specialist, and the rest of the team will help develop new protocols for military operations in sensitive Arctic environments." After the ceremony, the team gathered in their familiar briefing room, now filled with congratulatory messages and pictures of their bear family. Watson's seismic equipment had been replaced by new, more sophisticated monitoring systems. Kim's communication setup had been upgraded to work in the worst weather conditions. O'Connor had expanded their medical supplies to include wildlife care equipment. "Look at this," Martinez said excitedly, showing them his tablet. The morning's drone footage showed the mother bear playing with her cubs outside their new den. The larger cub was attempting to catch snowflakes, while the smaller one was learning to dig in the snow. Their mother watched protectively, healthy and strong. The scientists want to name them, Martinez continued. They're thinking of calling the mother Hope and the cubs Storm and Shelter. Sarah smiled, remembering the long night they had spent protecting the den. Perfect names, she said. They'll remind everyone that even in the harshest conditions, there's always hope if we work together. The team's experience had already begun changing how the military operated in the Arctic. New training programs included wildlife awareness and conservation protocols. Equipment was being modified to have less impact on the environment. Other military branches were adopting similar programs. Next week, we start training the first group of new recruits, Sarah announced, looking at her team proudly. Who better to teach them than the people who lived through it? The bear family had become symbols of both the challenges and the possibilities in the changing Arctic. Scientists used their story to explain the impact of climate change on polar bear habitats. Military strategists used it to demonstrate the importance of environmental awareness in modern operations. And for the public, it was a powerful reminder that compassion and duty could work hand in hand. As Sarah looked at the drone footage of the bears one more time, she remembered the moment when they had to choose between following protocol and following their hearts. They had chosen to help, to adapt, to protect. And that choice had changed not just 3 lives, but potentially the future of Arctic operations. Ready to train the next team? She asked her Marines. They stood together, looking at the photo of their bear family now hanging on the briefing room wall. The image would remind every new recruit that sometimes the most important missions are the ones you never expect to face. Ready, Sergeant, they replied in unison. Always ready.